I walked into my first meeting and I thought, oh, this is going to be great because I'm going to go in and I'm going to see how much worse off everybody else is. And then I'm going to know that I don't really belong here and I can go back to drinking.
Yeah, find someone worse. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm like, spending like an hour I'm like, oh, I need to have the perfect outfit and look so put together.
Yeah.
And then, I walk into that room and it is like a bunch of people exactly like me.
Welcome to Recovery.com, where we share authentic stories from influential voices about the joys of life in mental health and addiction recovery and the journeys that led us here. I'm Brittany Baynard, and today Tom Farley and I are joined by Elizabeth Pearson, content creator, marathon runner, and sober powerhouse behind @EatLizabeth. Based in Chicago, Elizabeth shares her recovery journey with raw honesty, sharp insight, and a generous dose of self-deprecating humor. After quitting alcohol cold turkey in her late 20s, she found healing through 12-step recovery, a new OCD diagnosis, and a spontaneous love for running. From the depths of depression to crossing the finish line of the New York City Marathon, Elizabeth reminds us that transformation is possible. She brought her pup Sawyer along for this one, so expect wisdom and tail wags. Here we go. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of Recovery.com. We are joined today by Elizabeth Pearson and Pupperino Sawyer. So glad to have you both today. Elizabeth is recovery advocate, runner, really cool woman, and we are going to get into it about her wonderful recovery story. Thank you so much for coming and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome to Madison, too.
All the way from Chicago?
All the way from Chicago.
Nice. Before we dive in, I'd like to ask, what are you hoping someone might take away from your story?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that someone can take away from my story, it's that you are not unique. I think that's the biggest thing, is that there is nothing wrong with you. You're not alone. The experiences that you're having, the things you're grappling with, so many of us go through those same things. And I want people to look at me and think like, oh, that can be me.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. So let's get into it. So reflecting on the early days of alcohol use and addiction, what was that like for you? What kind of set that off?
Yeah. So I think it really was this feeling of like something inherently being wrong with me, but not necessarily being able to name what that thing is. So always feeling like I was different and that no one understood me. And drinking was really a way for me to say, like, if you experience the things I experienced, you would drink like I drank too. But my drinking was not, it wasn't like something that I started from a really young age. It didn't start until I went to college. I was super type A. I was a compulsive rule follower. I was, involved in every extracurricular you can imagine at school, like very academically driven.
What were your thoughts on alcohol at that age? Like,
I was just scared of my parents.
Yeah. Okay. The fear. Okay. Yeah.
And not in a bad way. Addiction runs in our family. And I'd always been told that, alcohol is something that can be very dangerous and you really don't want to jeopardize your chances of getting into a good college either. And so I was just really like single-minded in terms of focusing on getting into school. And so it really just wasn't on the radar for a long time.
Yeah. So then you go to college and it's now on your radar because that's kind of like a part of college life for a lot of people. What is that first experience like? And then how does that feel to you? Does it set off some instant thing or is it kind of gradual?
Yeah. So I think with getting to college, like I was so driven and focused when I was in high school. And I'm like the least relaxed person you'll ever meet in your life. Do not have a cool bone in my body. And so when I got to college, it was like, oh my gosh, I have this opportunity to completely reinvent myself. And I went to an all girls private school for most of high school. So like really, I had like a pretty sheltered growing up for all intents and purposes. And so then, I'm thrust into this new environment and I just run anxiously. And so it was this, when I drank alcohol for the first time, it was like, okay, all of a sudden I get to turn off the noise in my brain and I just get to be. And I felt like drinking made me all the things that I wanted to be when I was sober. Like I thought it made me funnier and smarter and wittier and more confident. And so I just found myself then chasing that feeling. And I think when you learn to drink in like a binge drinking environment, you're not necessarily clued into the fact that it's abnormal if everyone around you is drinking that way.
Right. There, you will always find someone else that's like way worse than you.
Exactly.
Yes. And then when you think about it, you're like, okay, but like at any age, if somebody was consuming this much alcohol at any point, like that would be a problem, right? You're like, yeah, but no, I'm here, I'm doing the thing. It's super fun. At college, you're starting drinking. You hadn't experienced this before. Are you drinking by yourself?
Not really. I was in a sorority. I rushed when I was in college. And, to me, drinking in my mind was only problematic if it started to affect other things in your life. And so, I am on honor roll in college. Like I'm, continuing with all my extracurriculars. I'm in a sorority. Like I have all of the things that I think I should have in life that prove that I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
And so it really never clicked for me in college that there may be something wrong. And it's not to say, I didn't get into dangerous situations or I was, constantly making great choices.
Yeah.
But it was nothing consequential enough that led me to believe that like this was a true problem.
I'm guessing that it also didn't have any negative effects. Your grades were probably still where they always were. Your social life was the same, if not better.
Yeah.
That's very confusing. Nothing, there is no negative to this except this feeling.
Totally.
Yeah. And even at a young age, you felt this like there's something maybe like wrong. There's something just off. I can't fix that thing. And then you go to college and you start using alcohol to kind of like fill that. What did you feel like you were so tense about? What was causing you to be so anxious?
Yeah, I think I just have always struggled with kind of like this deep, unabiding insecurity and just not feeling comfortable in my own skin. And so I always say my first brush with addiction was really an eating disorder when I was in middle school and high school. It was a way, that I could easily seek control. It was a way for me to kind of, I don't know, I think I have this complex, right, where there's something inside of me that feels broken or bad and like I need to be punished and kept in line. And so that's really, I think that's been a large theme in my life is seeking out things that I feel like will keep me in line. So for a while, right, it was, restriction. And then I get to college and it's alcohol. And it's a huge part of my story too is just the men that I chose to be with. Yeah. And I was constantly seeking out, people who skewed towards more like physically and verbally abusive because I thought that like, as Elizabeth, like, I'm not going to be okay. Like, I can't trust myself to keep myself in line. So I need to surround myself with people who can do it for me.
Sometimes a lot of it comes from some trauma, but I haven't heard that at this point. It's just how we were wired. So it's not a trauma thing.
I have the strongly held belief that I was born an alcoholic. I don't believe there's anything that could have happened differently in my life to change who I am. I have two of the most loving parents. I was raised in a wonderful household. I was given every opportunity and then some. Yeah, are there things that happened when I was growing up that could be considered traumatic? Yeah, for sure. I mean, a large, I think, reason for why my drinking probably ratcheted up so quickly when I got to college is I dealt with a sexual assault my senior year of high school. And I grew up in a pretty Christian household and I didn't know what that meant. I really felt like that was like, oh, maybe this is divine punishment for making a mistake.
Okay.
And, I think drinking was it was a way for me to silence so much of that noise and not actually have to confront things that had happened. But I don't know. I think my relationship with all those things now is like, I lived and I drank because of like my quote unquote trauma for so long. Like in a weird way, I wanted to hold on to that trauma really, really tightly and closely because I felt like it gave me reasons to drink. And it kind of fit into this narrative that I was saying that like I am this total tragic character and like drinking is of course the only way that I can make it through and live in my body and in my life.
Yeah. At this point, had you ever gotten therapy? Did you have a therapist, attempt inpatient for either the eating disorder or just those feelings you were feeling?
My parents got me into therapy that senior year where kind of everything was coming to a head. When you're so tied to this idea of like being a victim and everything's happening to me, even if someone is giving you all the right advice and is handing you the right tools, unless you have a willingness to listen and look at things a different way, like it's it's not going to break through.
Right. But it's also sometimes how our brains are just wired. Like no one wants to sit there and punish themselves 24/7. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later with the later diagnosis that you had received. At this point, your therapist, were you diagnosed with anything?
No, and I really had no experience with therapy before going. I didn't grow up in a household where we use therapy speak. And it's not, I just think like even growing up, right, like 10 years ago, it wasn't as imbued in the culture as it is today. And so it was like, okay, my parents are like, we don't really know what to do for you. So we're going to have you go talk to someone else to see if they can figure it out. But then, I go to college in a few months after that. And so it's kind of just.
Right. And some people think like, I need some event to go to therapy, right? It's not like maintenance, like daily maintenance for stuff, which is like a great use for therapy, like just maintaining. So in college, do your friends, your family, is anyone noticing this? Because you hadn't drank before in high school, but you are still maintaining like that high functioning aspect of your personality and academics. What's that experience like with the people in your life?
There's never a moment that anyone came to me and was like, hey, Elizabeth, we think you have a problem. And I went to it's a really small school in Tennessee. My parents went to that school. My brothers went to that school. Like they were aware of what the drinking culture was. And it was, like 80% of the campus was in Greek life. Like that's just what you did.
Yeah.
It's so a huge part of like my addiction too was just hiding it. It was really good at kind of keeping all of, I don't know, the facade up, right? Of everything looking like it was perfect, because that was my protection mechanism. Was like, I was so afraid that someone was going to take alcohol away from me if they figured out that that was the problem. And so if I could construct, A, like looking like I had it all together, but B, like if there was a problem, if I could kind of assign that to something that wasn't alcohol, like that was my survival mechanism.
Right. But it all still is though, isn't it? It's like, and you don't have to be homeless, jobless for alcohol to be a problem. Yeah. We don't need to literally hit rock bottom before we notice it in ourselves. To be like, I think I've got an issue. Did you ever bring it up to people?
I'm sure there were moments when I was, where we've all woke up really hungover and you're like, I'm never doing
hangover
that again.
shame. Yeah.
But I always did it again, because I think that's the way that an alcoholic brain is wired, is you're always going to find your way back to it.
You're in this normative drinking culture. Your family doesn't see anything wrong. It doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. Then you just decide to walk into an AA meeting.
Yeah. Well, there are a few things that happened in the years between college and me ending up in a room. I referenced this before, but is just that relationship component. So during COVID, I had moved in with somebody that I'd been dating. And unfortunately, it turned out to be a really unsafe situation. And, COVID was just totally unprecedented times. I think on the one hand, we were seeing all of this like mom wine culture, and like it was just omnipresent and people were normalizing like drinking as a coping mechanism. And I was pretty isolated from my family at that point. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I'd failed because my parents they didn't tell me not to do it, but they were like, we don't think this is a great idea.
You don't want to hear, and I told you so.
Of course not. God forbid, my mom is right. And so I was just, it was just like layer upon layer of shame and feeling like I had failed. And so, the only way I felt like I could cope was to drink. So I started drinking alone all the time.
Yeah.
There was kind of I guess like a pretty pivotal moment that happened in that where my dad ended up coming and moving me out in the middle of the night.
What happened?
It had escalated to a point where it was just so unsafe.
In your relationship?
Yes, exactly. And my parents often talk about how Sawyer, my dog, saved my life, because my self-esteem was so low at that point that I didn't really care what happened to me. But I adopted Sawyer when I was in that relationship, and he really started abusing Sawyer. And I just couldn't watch that happen.
Wow.
And so that was really what got me out. And it is my strongly held belief that like, I don't know if I would have made it through the rest of the year with the level at which things were progressing. And so I ended up moving home, and that still wasn't enough to get me sober. I had probably, I think, 3 more years after that I was drinking. Yeah. And that was just another like trauma box that I got to tick off. And it was a reason for me to drink, right? Like, can you believe I was in this horrible situation? I mean, it wasn't an excuse, right? But like, it was just something else that really amplified and had me double down on my drinking. And I was stuck on the hamster wheel, and I tried everything. And I was like doing fine. I had a boyfriend. I had a good job. I was getting promotions at work. My family they weren't like, oh, we think this is a huge problem, but it had started to become a little bit more apparent that I wasn't well.
Yeah.
And that drinking was becoming, something for me to fall back on. I was so deeply depressed. I had a plan for how I wanted to end my life. But then I woke up one morning. It was a Wednesday morning. It was nothing out of the ordinary had happened the night before, but I was just hungover again. And I really believe it was divine intervention. And it was like, you have two choices right now. You are either going to stop drinking or you're going to die. And so I was dry, which for those that don't know, in recovery, like a 12-step they call dry is when you're not drinking, but you're not actively working a program. So I did that for about a month, and physically I felt better than I'd ever felt. But all I could think about was drinking, and I didn't understand why. I had a moment where I was like, I don't know a single sober person. I've never met a sober person in my life. I don't know what to do. I didn't know if AA was a real thing. I had seen it in movies before, but I was like, is this a thing that people do? And I happened to find a meeting that night, and something got me there. It happened to be a young person's meeting. I got sober in Denver, and they have things there called ticket meetings. So they give you a ticket at the door, and if they pull it, you speak. And mine was pulled, and it was it was just this crazy quick succession of events. And I mean, it was the scariest, but most wonderful moment of my life is when I said, like, hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm an alcoholic, because finally it was just this weight lifted off my chest of being like, I have been trying to figure out for like a decade what is wrong with me. And I'm now sitting in a room full of people who just understand the way that my brain is wired. And I have a solution now. And I was dating someone at the time who, it wasn't a healthy relationship, and it takes two to tango. And I came home that night and I told him where I went, and he was very unhappy.
Really?
Very unhappy. And it was, Elizabeth, you're being dramatic. You're not an alcoholic. I know alcoholics. You're not one of them.
Why did they think you were not an alcoholic?
I think, and this is something I've learned throughout my recovery, is people take your choices around drinking very personally. And I think if you are close to someone and you've been drinking together and you say, I have a problem, they think it's an indictment on their choices. At that point, like, my drinking had become really isolating in a lot of ways. And I burned a lot of bridges, and, I was dealing with a lot of shame. But I was constantly able to make excuses as to why I could keep drinking. And I always say, like, that moment of coming home, my boyfriend at the time being very disappointed in me, and I still chose to go to a meeting the next day. Like, that was kind of like my burning bush moment, right? Where finally I had something in my life that felt bigger and more important to me than making somebody else happy or to fit somebody else's idea of who I should be and what I should be doing. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, right? Like, it was a place that I could go and feel connected to people and not have to explain myself and not have to, break down like I feel this way and then be like, well, I don't understand, just drink less, or, why, like, just have self-esteem or all these things, because there was just this group of women that it was like we all had the same brain, and I didn't feel crazy anymore.
Yeah.
Did you go to find a women's group after that?
I did.
Like, that's so key.
And that is key. Yeah. And that's one of my biggest pieces of advice for women who are interested in getting into recovery is different strokes for different folks. But like, I think the connection and the honesty I found in rooms of women has been like beyond anything that I had experienced before.
Right. It's like, when you explain your story to the masses, you feel like, oh, did anybody did it? But when you're sitting there with like, these are women who have been through this experience. They could have experienced it all over the world, but we still have this like thing in common that brings us together, where they can have a similar story and we just feel connected that way. That's a beautiful space for those relationships to develop. You were having thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. Was that the first time you had felt that way?
No, I'd actually had an attempt my freshman year of college, I think, when sort of all this just confusion about my assault in high school was coming to a head. And for me, it was, I got all this noise in my head and it was so exhausting to live up there. And I didn't know how to make it stop. And the thought of having to live with that noise forever was so, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I was like, how am I supposed to make it through the rest of my life when everything sounds like this all the time?
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize those might be pre-suicidal ideations that are also really important to speak to somebody about, because like your story, you said, I felt this way. I felt this way. And it just becomes overwhelming at sometimes. And whether people make a plan or not, having those thoughts, that's that ideation of not wanting to be here anymore. Your dog saved you from those feelings. And it still wasn't something that like you felt you could bring yourself out of. And you're still getting out of that relationship. Now you found a community in AA. What are the next steps? Like what are you finding to help you build these tools to not go back to this point again?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that I received when I came into the rooms was I cannot overemphasize that I had the gift of desperation. I have a lot of women that through social media that come to me and are like, how did you get sober? And I'm like, I just didn't have another choice. And I was so desperate to feel differently and to feel well that I was willing to do anything that anybody told me to live a different life. It's that willingness. And I think too, a really common thing that I've found with other women in recovery is that a lot of us felt like we had an inability to have good relationships with women before we got into the rooms. It's like, well, of course you did, because you're so selfish when you're in active addiction and you're willing to hurt anyone and anything that stands in your way of getting what you want. And for me, that was a lot of like validation-based stuff, right? And so you get in and not only do I have this opportunity to rebuild my life, but also to rebuild how I think about being in relationships with other people and how I can show up for people. And one of my favorite things I heard early on in recovery is that how lucky are we that we get to have two lives? Like we get to have our drunk life and our sober life, and nobody else gets to experience that. And what a miracle that I get to live two different lives and choose again.
Gratitude.
One of the steps is to, make an inventory of all our deficits. That's fine. But that's at that life. I'm also making an inventory of the stuff that I've gained. Have you gotten to that point of like, this life in recovery has given me so much? What are those things?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, gratitude is a huge part of my practice and daily reprieve. And I think gratitude is one of those words that we all kind of like roll our eyes at because we're like, okay, everyone says that that's the key to it, but it really is. I think that the way that I stay out of my resentments and out of like my jealousy or my comparison to other people, places, and things is I can just look at my life and all of these things that I now take for granted, having a couple years of sobriety under my belt, were things I couldn't have imagined having before. There's a part in the big book that says like we will be able to look the world in the eyes. I think that's really sums up my recovery, is like I have this ability to no longer be so overcome with shame and humiliation and hatred for myself. And I can really look people in the eyes, even when I make mistakes, and own them and apologize them. And I think we build self-esteem by doing esteemable things. And they talk about constantly taking the next right action, right? It's not about having to know how to do everything today. But it's about being able to make a choice to do the next right thing, which I think makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
Kind of the third pillar for me is the whole rigorous honesty. I was like, I thought I was an honest person, but rigorously honest? No, there's no way. But I didn't think that was a thing. Did that change your life too? Yeah, just that honesty part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of my lack of honesty before had to do with deception for image maintenance's sake, right? So it was, again, like so afraid that if people knew I had a problem, they would take alcohol away from me. And so I wanted to create sort of like this impenetrable wall between me and everybody else. And this was constructed of all these like material things and things that I would achieve and just all of this crap that didn't really mean anything at the end of the day. There's this quote I love that says like all roads of glory lead to the grave. And like, yeah, I had a complete inability to be honest, I think mostly with myself too, because so much of active addiction is finding an excuse for everything. And if I could find someone to blame for something, like you bet I did all the time. And the best way that it was described to me when I came into the program, especially as far as resentments are concerned, is your resentments aren't necessarily the ways that people have wronged you, but it's the ways that you give away your power. And I think I had no concept of the fact that I would give away my power to anybody. It's like somebody cuts me in line. Here, you can have the rest of my day because I'm so angry now. Toxic relationships that I'd been in. Well, I'm going to drink over this and I'm going to stew over this. And it's going to be the reason that I, railroad the next 3 years of my life. And I have learned to turn it over, which was something that I didn't have the ability to do before. I didn't understand that I didn't need to react to everything, that I didn't need to have a point of view on everything, that life is mostly opportunities to just let go and move on.
What is it like from going dry to sober for you? What was that experience like for you?
I walked into my first meeting and I thought, oh, this is going to be great because I'm going to go in and I'm going to see how much worse off everybody else is. And then I'm going to know that I don't really belong here and I can go back to drinking.
Yeah, find someone worse. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm like, spending like an hour I'm like, oh, I need to have the perfect outfit and look so put together. Yeah. And then, I walk into that room and it is like a bunch of people exactly like me. And going from being dry to being sober was, I get emotional thinking about it. Like I went from feeling like I had nobody in my corner to like, I don't know, this is really what I try to talk to women about in particular is if you feel alone, the best place that you can go is a recovery meeting, because I have never had the experience in my life before that of just having a room of strangers so ready to love me, like good, bad, and different. Like it doesn't matter what I did to get there. I think another big thing for me too was having to unlearn this idea that a seat in AA needs to be earned. I have to have this sordid tale and this very specific type of rock bottom to be here. Like run of the mill
alcoholics. It doesn't have to be the trauma Olympics. Like,
exactly.
Like previously said, you do not need to be jobless and homeless for this to affect your life to a point where you're like, no, I'm an alcoholic. I know it. I can see it in myself and I want to fix that.
Being vulnerable. Did you find that quickly or did it take a while?
The step work has been, that is what has changed my life. And a lot of people, they're like, okay, how did you get sober? The only answer I have is 12 step, because I tried to do it on my own before. Like it is 12 simple steps. And that is how I have changed my life. And it wasn't until I got into doing an inventory that I really began to understand that there was something deeper there. And I think also this idea, right, that like, I believe alcohol wasn't my problem. I think it was my only solution. I don't know. I think that's something I try to communicate to people too that are struggling with the idea of like, should I get into recovery or not? Like, am I an alcoholic or not? Like, do you feel that like alcohol is your solution for life? And that is exactly how it was for me. And the fact is, when I start drinking, I can't stop.
Well, I'm happy that regardless of when you told people and they made you feel like you shouldn't feel that way, that you did it anyways.
Yeah. And I will say like my parents and my family has been so supportive. Like, I think that was like a huge dichotomy too, right? Was like on the one hand, I have, friends and boyfriend and over here that are like, there's no way, Elizabeth. And then my parents are like, oh, thank God, girl. You finally got there.
We didn't want to say it, but
they're like,
so
your journey.
Here. Yeah. Oh, funny. So you have brought the 12 steps into your life. You're going to meetings and you're taking care of the substance use aspect of your life. I'm excited to get into this part. So you had been diagnosed with OCD later on in life, a few years into your recovery, along with depression and anxiety. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did that change your perspective on the experiences you had in addiction, your current mental health? And what was your idea of OCD before you learned that you had that?
I really thought OCD was just you have to wash your hands a lot.
Yeah,
like
clean room.
Like medical OCD. Like I really thought that was the only thing. And what I learned is that it's really about like obsessive thoughts and obsessive thinking. And so I can totally, there's a clear connection.
As you're talking, I'm like, you loop on thoughts. Oh, like, yes, you ruminate on things. You let things take over.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and alcohol is like obviously an obsession. And I don't believe that alcoholism is a product of my OCD. Right. I don't think my OCD helped my alcoholism.
It just was helping silence that overwhelming feeling.
Exactly.
Yes.
And like the thing about OCD too is it is so incessant. And the way I've described it is it almost feels like, I don't know if you've watched Star Wars, but the one with the trash compactor when they're like stuck in that room. And I'm like, that is how my head would feel, is just, I would just feel so like stuck and like just the world was closing in on me.
Yeah, I feel like when people hear OCD, they're like, oh, you just clean a lot, you wash your hands. It's this self-doubt in yourself, which makes you like, well, I did that because I literally didn't think I did it before. I locked the bathroom door. I went to the lock 4 times in a row because and then sat down. It's this self-doubt, which is also possibly just going back to some of the things that you said, like in college, like I need this type of validation because I'm doubting myself so much. And that was at the core, not some vanity thing, but it's literally how your brain was wired to take in information. So we have experiences in our life with like mental health and how we experience it on our own. But what's that like interacting with people just in your everyday life? Like, how does it manifest at times?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing I grapple with today still is self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I think that's self-doubt, right? Like you nailed it on the head. That's exactly what it is. It's feeling like I can't trust myself, or that I think, again, like there's something inherently wrong. And that's when I really realized, right, that like alcoholism is a thinking disease. It's not a drinking disease. I've taken like a twofold approach to this. Like I'm medicated, and that's great. And that's really helpful. But I also I can't solely rely on that. Like my program is a huge part of it too.
Right.
And I treat my OCD a lot like I treat my alcoholism, which is I need a daily reprieve, and I need a daily practice.
Yes.
To be able to live and to live well. And I think one of the biggest and most important aspects of my recovery has been freeing myself from having to be a victim, right? Is like, I can have these things. These things don't have to define me. Like these are just things that exist in my life. And sometimes they inform the way I look at the world, but that doesn't have to be it for me. That's not the whole story. And so I have like a deep desire now to just, I don't know, like overcome, but
it's just like awakening, and the education is the helpful part. It's not about getting the diagnosis, it's knowing what it is and kind of incorporating it in your life. Like you said, it's not an excuse for why I do the things, but it helps me understand. So then I know what tools to grab when I feel that thing coming again.
Exactly.
What are some tools that you utilize in your life for OCD?
The biggest one is asking for help. I had a complete inability to ever tell somebody that I was struggling before I got into recovery. And so being able to call my mom, call someone else in the program, journaling, like all that sort of stuff, I've just learned that like the solution is not to keep it inside. And one of my biggest character defects is I still struggle with like image maintenance to this day, right? Yeah. And so I'm notorious for like going ghost on people for 2 weeks and then coming back once I've like figured everything out and being like, yeah, well, I was on the verge there 2 weeks ago and I'm doing so well now.
Yeah. Do you tend to be very introspective? When it comes to things, so like say a situation happens, you're going to kind of like overanalyze it all in your head before you bring it to the other person.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And
my notes app is a terrifying place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to see that.
Which is terrible because then it's like, we just worked out this whole situation without including the other person. And they're like, wait, what? I literally didn't even think of that. I don't know why. You're like, oh, okay. Because I thought you hated me. Yeah. This podcast is brought to you by Recovery.com. It's a place where anyone can find mental health or addiction treatment options specific to them. You can filter by location, price, insurance coverage, therapy type, mental health condition, levels of care, and so much more. Recovery.com is the best place to find mental health or addiction treatment for anyone, anywhere. Relationships and sobriety. So like how do you navigate that? So you were dating somebody, you opened up to them, you're like, I think I'm an alcoholic. That didn't go too well with them. That had to not feel so great. How have you approached being sober in relationships since then?
I really think that confidence is built over time, and you just reach a point in your recovery where it kind of shuts off a lot of the outside noise, right? Okay. And the thing that I really believe to my core is that if I don't have my sobriety, I don't have anything else. And so it has to come first. It has to come before my relationships, my job, because I don't get that stuff if I'm not sober. And so, I think so many women, especially like young women, are so anxious about getting sober because they're like, no one's going to want to date me. And when I tell you that was my number one fear when I came into the program was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get married now. And I can't have champagne at my wedding. That's a super common one. You think I was a good partner when I was drinking and yelling at people?
Good point. Good point.
Absolute disaster. Yeah. And so I think like the great thing about getting into recovery is it's not only not drinking, but it gives you tools to like own your part and move through conflict resolution. And like, I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm not ashamed of what I say or what I do. And I've actually found that, it's helped me get into really healthy relationships, because I can't be in a healthy relationship unless I'm healthy and sober.
Yes.
What are those, signs or triggers that you're aware of now that when you're out in public that tell you like, okay, I got to call somebody, I got to go to a meeting, I got to read something. I'm very aware of what those things are.
Sure. No, my OCD like primarily manifests in my personal relationships. So I do like kind of you said, right? Like a lot of overanalyzing of like conversations and situations when I'm like unable to get out of a place of like spiraling and thinking about something that happened or something I said. The best thing for me is to get outside myself and to get into community. And I think this is the part of the program that is the best, right? Is that it teaches you that the way to get out of your own head is to help somebody else. And I did not have the opportunity, or I don't want to say I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't have the wherewithal to think about anybody but me before I got into recovery. And so now I know if I'm having a bad day, I don't call someone and say I'm having a bad day. I call them and I'm like, tell me about your day. Because getting outside of yourself, I really think is the key to like a life of like immense satisfaction, of deepened relationships. I had someone tell me how to choose my meetings is you have one meeting that like really feeds your soul. You have one meeting that pisses you off because you go and you learn how to be patient, and you learn that it doesn't really matter how you feel. Like we have a primary purpose, and it has taught me to be far more patient. And then the third meeting is one where you like know you can be of service, so like a beginner's meeting or something like that. And I think maintaining that, right, like being able to feed my needs, but also being able to I guess remedy my character defects in some ways has become really, really critical to my program.
What are some things that you noticed that now you're like, that was my OCD affecting relationships? That was my OCD affecting my life?
I think that the biggest way that it's manifested in relationships is like the incessant need for validation, especially after like I feel that I make a mistake, right? And it's obsessing over like you didn't actually mean what you said, and it's spiraling. And I think you talked about it earlier, but it is like having a conversation with someone else that they're never a part of, because you're just having that conversation in your head.
Yeah, and you can make it really, really bad. People are like,
really bad.
Do you like worry about what people think of you? I don't think about it. I'm thinking what you think of me. I will make the whole story up in my head, and we will just chill here.
Exactly.
How do you communicate with partners then? Like, is that something that you're able to communicate to partners to work through that? Like, I need you to be direct. I need very, like, what are some things then to help out relationships?
Recovery has completely changed the way I look at relationships, because it's taught me how to take accountability for who I am. And it's not anyone else's job to make me feel okay about me. It's a partnership, and it's supposed to be loving and supportive, but they're not responsible for my emotional state, and I'm not responsible for theirs. And I think unlearning a lot of that emotional codependency has been a big part of my recovery journey as well, which is that if my boyfriend is upset about work, it doesn't mean he's mad at me, and I need to like spiral and then start to make the situation about me and obsess over that. Sometimes people just have a bad day at work. And so I think it's that being able to have like peace amidst like the chaos and calamity that is life.
Yeah, that's such a great reason for having these tools to work through that, because yes, you can be medicated, you can know the things, you can go to therapy, but that stuff will just happen because life keeps on happening. So you need to be like, okay, it's not about me. My mom used to have to tell me all the time, people are not thinking about you as much as you think they are thinking about you. They're probably not thinking about it.
Have you found like the shift from like you're attracting people and opportunities and people and things, instead of managing, you're just trying to manage yourself, and it's coming.
Yeah. I mean, I was so reliant on external factors to make me feel okay before. And I think that's right. Another like hallmark shift I've had because of my recovery is understanding that everything is going to be okay. If the worst thing could happen, but like I'm still going to be okay, and I don't need to drink over it. And I think just like, acceptance is the answer to all my problems. And it really is that simple.
Yeah.
You're a runner. One level of running, this is just physical fitness, but then there's the spirituality part that I think people in recovery find Is that why you got into running, or?
It's kind of interesting. I don't talk about it a ton. So my mom's actually an Episcopal priest. So I grew up incredibly religious, and would still say I'm pretty religious to this day. And so I think a lot of my spirituality like stems directly like from that faith, and recovery's been a really cool experience for me because I've been able to connect back to that, which I feel like I had really lost previously. And in terms of running, yes, definitely a spiritual component to running. I think more than anything, running is this very clear-cut way for me to show up for myself and hold myself accountable.
Yeah.
And keep promises. And that was something I just wasn't able to do that when I was drinking. And, I think one of probably the downsides of running in terms of why I love running is because there's still this part of me that has this like desperate need to achieve. And I think that's something that like I'm still working through and will continue to work through in my recovery, is feeling like the way that I am today is still not enough. And I think a lot of women struggle with this, especially if you get into recovery because of like this huge reliance on like perfectionism, right? Is feeling like, okay, now that I am an alcoholic and I'm in recovery, I'm going to be like the best recovering alcoholic you've
most
ever
recovered,
seen.
the most.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, that's been part of it for me too, is like, I think there's, maybe this more noble part of running that's like, oh, wow, I can keep all these promises to myself and show up consistently and like, live this like in this really fulfilled way that I wasn't able to before. But the other side of that coin is that I feel like unless I am, catching medals and PRs,
is not our thing. Yeah.
What am I doing?
But that knowledge, is important, whether it's, I know this about myself. That's very key. And it's funny. I grew up and still am very religious too. And one of the things I joke about is like, when I first came into the rooms, I'm like, well, I only have to do, 11 steps. I already got
Right.
And that is not what recovery is at all in the rooms. Like I thought it was religion. It's not.
Yeah. And I would say too, like a lot of people, right, are very hesitant about 12-step because they feel that it is religious. And I'd say the interesting thing about coming in with a faith is you have to have a willingness to unlearn the faith that you came in with, because the God and the higher power I have now is not the higher power I had when I was growing up in Sunday school.
Exactly.
You really get to define that for yourself. Like it isn't a religious program, but it is a spiritual program. And I think the other big thing I always try to stress to women is when I came in, I thought that I was going to get smacked over the head with a spiritual experience. And what you learn through your step work is that a spiritual experience it's a product of work. It's not a product of just sitting there and waiting for something to happen to you. It's something that you bring into your life through your step work.
One can certainly help the other. Again, my recovery has helped my faith in the sense that I used to pray for things. Give me this, give me a better job.
Sure.
Now it's just take this. I can't. I just
100% turning it over.
And I'm sure you found that too.
Yeah. I mean, people are like, what are your prayers? My prayers usually like, help me. It's this acknowledgement that like, I am completely powerless. The best and simplest thing I can do is just ask for help. And I love that part of, I think it's 9-step prayer where it's like, God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And that's like kind of cheesy, but every time I run, especially like when I'm running marathons and I feel like I'm struggling, I constantly say in my head, like, God is doing for me what I could not do for myself. And that's really what gets me through the tough moments.
Going from, I felt this broken piece, I felt alone, I felt othered, I felt by myself, to and out of control and looking for things to feel in control, going to like, I've given up control. Like I've submitted, and this is when the chaos stopped. Stopping grabbing for that like control in life, because nobody can control anything that happens. We can just control the way we react to things and the way we're able to handle things. You ran a marathon. I don't know why you're not telling more people. Didn't you run a marathon?
3, yeah.
3? 3? Optionally? That's wild.
So yeah, I've run 3 now, and it was, the first one was it was the classic, like I got sober, now I'm gonna get really into running.
What's that first experience?
I never had
like
that.
doing a marathon?
that.
Just skip.
Yeah.
And that was like just really emotional for me.
Yeah.
My younger brother, I did in Hawaii, which has like always just been like a really spiritual place for me. And my younger brother came and watched, and he's someone that I just couldn't show up for when I was drinking. And I like would borrow money from him. Like I was such a disaster. I never got to be an older sister. And I think that is like the most special part of my recovery, is that it's like your family recovers. It's not just you, right?
Yeah.
Like it is truly like it's healed my family in ways that I can't describe. And I had no ability to understand how much my drinking was breaking apart my family.
Try to describe that. I mean, that's really important. That's what a gift.
I was a really biting person when I drank. I knew what would cut people deep if I said it. And I knew how to emotionally manipulate people to get what I wanted. And I just didn't treat my family well. And I think the other big thing too is I had no concept of how worried my parents were all the time. And it wasn't just Elizabeth is going out and she's going to get arrested. Like that wasn't my parents' fear. My parents' fear was that like I was never going to be happy. And so I joke that like my parents have like reverse aged 10 years since I got sober. And, you know, my parents came to all my CHIP meetings my first year and held my hand when I got my CHIP. And they have ridden so hard for me. And I feel very lucky. I know that's not like everyone's experience, but I think it's so funny. I remember saying to my dad, he flew to Chicago for me to get my 2-year CHIP this past year. And we were sitting at dinner and I was like, yeah, I was worried you guys were going to be so ashamed when I told you that I was going to AA. And he said, we have never been more proud of you than in that moment. And I think there's just so much fear around disappointing people when you admit that you have a problem, but like asking for help and giving the people that love you the opportunity to help you I think that's like the greatest gift that we can give people. And just like a willingness to do things differently. And I mean, there are periods of time in my life where, you know, I didn't see my mom's dad because of his drink, like, and alcoholism has touched our family in a lot of different ways. And I think like as a parent, I'm imagining it's really hard to see your child begin to go down that road and like not know if you can do anything about it. And like my parents they've just been so amazing to let me do it in like my time and my terms too. So yeah, I'm really, really lucky.
Your parents sound amazing.
They are. They're the best.
I'm so glad you got to have that moment with your brother. That sounds really cool.
That was your first, as you described, first drinking environment. It was your family. Same for me. It's like, this is, you know, we were all drinkers together.
Totally.
And I was the first one to get in recovery. And maybe, I don't know if the rest are the last sobriety. I have that relationship back, you know, which I was losing in my drinking because of resentments and this and that. Now it's just me, like, and it sounds like you found the same thing. It's like, and probably in a better way than you ever had it before, because it's not the relationship that you wanted, tried so hard to, it's just what it is. And you're grateful for it. Have you made amends or told them you're grateful for things like that? How have you brought recovery to that relationship?
Oh, big time. I mean, I think what I didn't realize when I got into recovery were some of the things that people in my family were still grappling with. So I remember talking to my brother when I gave him amends, and he said, I've been so afraid the last couple of years that like I was the reason that like I enabled you, because like we would go drink together sometimes, right? And like you don't realize like all the weight sometimes that other people carry in their life. And I think like the biggest and best blessing I've been able to give my family is that like it's not on any of them. Like my recovery is mine. It's not anyone else's responsibility. And I think just like the biggest thing for my family too is showing up. Like great relationships are built on like two people being able to show up for one another. And that's really like, that's what it is in our family now. I am as loved as I've always been by them, but I'm finally like awake enough to experience it. And I think that is like one of my greatest sadnesses for people who may be struggling to get into recovery, right? Or who may just kind of like spend their life circling the drain, is there is so much in your life that exists right in this very moment that you are only going to be able to see once you surrender and once you give up drinking and get into recovery. And a beautiful life is, I don't think it was something that I necessarily like created out of nothing when I got sober. It was there the whole time. I started to live in it.
What you just said was just so beautiful. And just remembered when we first started, you were talking about how you grew up and we didn't have these dialogue of therapy talks and people didn't talk that way.
Yeah.
And here you are on social media now creating that dialogue. How amazing is that to like know that you're helping others that probably didn't have that either growing up, but now you're fostering this. It's okay to talk about these things.
Alcoholism is not shameful. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around that. And I just want other people to understand that like, it's not a moral failing. You haven't done anything wrong. And it's okay to ask for help. And like, you're not weak for asking for help. And there is the whole life I was chasing when I was drinking happened to me when I got sober. I wouldn't have believed that if you told me. And so I get it when people are like, I just don't think that's going to happen. Like I couldn't envision a life without alcohol before I got sober, but it really does happen.
You're chasing a life and now you're in recovery. You're accepting that this is the life. Totally. I'm not chasing anything. It's like, it's this. Mm-hmm. And how amazing is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What have you found that just you didn't see coming at all?
I think the biggest thing for me is just being okay with me, right? Like it's being able to spend time with myself and look in the mirror and feel okay with who I see looking back at me. And I had an opportunity in December to take a solo trip to Paris. And like, I could never have imagined in a million years going to Paris and not drinking alcohol. I went when I was 12 for the first time, and I'm
Irish. Yeah. Like I didn't think I'd ever be able to go to Ireland, but like, I am totally fine.
Yeah. And I was able to go and I had the absolute best time. And I was able to go to meetings when I was there. And I was just, it was just this like, wow, I get this big, beautiful life and I get to do all of these things because I'm not sitting alone at home drinking and being mad at the world because my life looks the way that it does.
Right. You took that chance. You went to the meetings. Yes.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
got the tools. Yeah. You really changed everything.
Well, what I like to say is one of my favorite things is that recovery exists on the other side of fear. Mm-hmm. Do you feel, is that one of the things that you're feeling now is a lot less fear?
Yes and no. Yeah, I think fear is still something I grapple with, but it's
always going to be, yeah.
But I will say a quote that I love that a friend said to me early on in recovery is feelings aren't facts, right? So it's really that feel the fear and do it anyway. 12-step recovery. It's not about how you feel, because if it's about how I feel, I'm going to drink every single time.
Yeah.
And so it's about being really scared and then moving through it anyway, because you have this faith and this trust that like there is a bigger plan for you and that I don't actually need to figure it out. Like that is not my job. And what a relief.
Yeah. So imagine there's someone out there struggling right now. What's something you would want them to know?
Everything that you want right now is on the other side of that last drink. All the things that you're chasing right now with alcohol are only things that happen when you stop drinking. You know, our brains are wired to be looking for that next dopamine hit. And I think the amazing thing about recovery is it teaches you like how to be squarely in the middle and to not constantly be chasing the highs and lows of life. And I think another thing that I got told early on as well is I needed to find a way to define myself outside of believing that I was like above or below other people, and finding identity that has nothing to do with what anybody else is doing has been a huge thing for me.
You have an amazing way with words. I mean, yes, absolutely. That was wonderful. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us here. I'm glad you came up north, to join us here in Wisconsin.
Oh my gosh.
Tell us where all our viewers can find you. What are your socials?
Yeah, my socials are just at Eat Elizabeth. So, that was a COVID account that I made when I thought I was going to post food.
Love that.
Yeah, that's so funny. Oh my
gosh. Commit. All right. Well, thank you again so much for coming. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.